So the real House of Boys in Berlin, and one of your resources was a dancer who had actually worked in the House of Boys.
Yeah.
Now, the customers don't come off very nice, and particularly the American customers.
Yeah, Rick. Yeah, fashion designer from New York, in fact. Yeah.
Based on a real character, I assume.
Based on a real character, yeah.
Which we're not going to name.
We're not going to name, but he was based on a real character that Jean-Claude found in his research for the film. And Rick is blamed in the movie, I guess, for bringing the disease.
It's the only part of the film that I found a little,
Oh, really?
the blaming of one person. I mean, the idea of someone consciously knowing they're HIV positive or having AIDS and going into these kinds of experiences knowingly is a really shocking thing. But it's also it takes away from the whole. Let's talk a little bit more about the businessman that ran the club, Madame. Yes, yeah. Madame turns out to be at his core a business person.
Absolutely, and also at his core somebody not quite strong enough to deal with the reality of what's happened.
Well, he's strong enough to know that this is bad for business.
Yeah.
And Golden Boy suddenly doesn't have a job.
Yeah. Golden Boy's kicked out. Jake's kicked out of the club as soon as he finds out. But he's kicked out of the club not just for being sick, but for being part of the new paranoia that was suddenly risen in the air. Suddenly there was this new thing.
It's 1982. I really want to put it back into location. Yeah.
We're talking about 1982. We're talking about some of the first kind of cases of AIDS happening. And it's nothing, before this, it wasn't around then. Suddenly there's this paranoia. Horrible names, gay cancer, horrible names coming on, this new disease. And suddenly Madame finds himself saying it's bad for business because there's enough paranoia suddenly around in the air. And then he suddenly realizes that Jake, the golden boy of the club, might be a part of this new paranoia. And he decides to kick him out because it's bad for business, as he puts it to her.
In the early days of the AIDS crisis here in New York and in San Francisco, the sex-related businesses absolutely were in denial.
Yeah.
And if any activists tried to say, well, why don't you put condoms out, or why don't you put up a sign, they wouldn't do it. And these were mostly gay-owned businesses at this point. It wasn't mafia anymore. So there's a love story too. I mean, we've talked about the sort of the dark side of the film. The thing that I think that really pulls through on the film is an intimate relationship between the boy who's run away, who's found himself by accidents and happenstance, and gradually becomes a boy in the House of Boys.
He becomes a man almost by the end of it. Yeah. It's a real coming of age and a passage as well.
But he also doesn't run away from Jake.
No.
He like so many people, stayed.
Yeah.
This is without marriage. This is without any of the sort of social forces that keep people together. And that part of the story, I think, will really resonate with any viewer who has lived through that period, because there's people never understood why someone would stay.
Yeah.
They were young. They had their lives ahead of them.
Yeah.
And he stays with Jake, and Jake is no longer is the Adonis boy.
No, Jake, but it's Jake. I mean, it's there's a very touching moment where Frank says that I'm not going to abandon you, and I think it's probably the first person that Frank's ever done it. I mean, Frank is a young kid. He's very proud of his sexuality. He loves the attention, and for the first time in his life, it's about someone else. And it's the first time Jake's ever had this kind of care from someone else.
And Frank, it's Frank. Yes,
yeah, it's Frank's
he's also a golden boy.
Yeah.
He's blonde.
Yeah.
He's the other sort of like dream boy.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of, and he replaces.
Yeah.
He replaces Jake as Madame's golden. The film is not just one dark story.
No.
There's a wonderful, because we go into the club and
music fueled.
It's like going into Thailand in a sense. I mean, you go to a club in Thailand and you see all these boys with numbers on them, and it's a little unless that's what you're there for. It's predatory.
Yeah.
But I think that the film shows this is a human condition. These are human beings. Whether you like them or judge them or whatever, they build family.
Absolutely.
You know,
it's a real family under the roof of the club.
I don't know if it would actually, in the House of Boys, if there was someone who wanted to have a sex change, would be as much a prominent person as it is the politically correct character.
Amazing character. Yeah.
But it's such a sissy boy.
Yeah.
You know, and a pretty sissy boy. You know, so the representation of the different kind of stereotypes of gay men are all in there, including the ugly ones who come and buy.
Exactly, but it's also I think it's less about the kind of stereotypes. I agree with you. There's lots of different kind of identities and people come in different places, but it's very different performers. You know, it's all people who are brought together under this roof. And the real club that we shot in, I mean, it was the same. Some of them were very dedicated. It was a way of life. Others, it was just a job that they came on. Others, they were always somehow in drag. Others, it would just drop it and they're off doing their lives. And that was the nice thing about it, is that Jean-Claude wanted a real variety of different characters.
And drugs.
And drugs, and music. Jean-Claude's always said that it was really a kind of time capsule film. He wanted it to be a real glimpse of that period in the early 80s where, you know, the music was extravagant, the fashion was extravagant, there was poppers and coke, and it was all, he said it was the last.
It was fun.
It was fun. It was fun and it was free living. And then that's why suddenly you introduce this kind of paranoia and a lot of confusion. It really changed things forever. It changed the face of the club scene. Sex was different. Even drugs became a kind
Well, you see, you grew up, though, not Jake, but Ben
the actor,
grew up and became of age sexually in a time of fear around sex.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've always been aware of it since my first, days of when I first discovered sex. I've always been aware that, wearing a condom is what you do. I mean, safe sex was drummed into me, not from my parents, but by the environment I found myself. But what shocks me is that I speak to my 16-year-old cousin, or I speak to young friends, and it's almost considering not just AIDS, but sexually transmitted diseases across the board are a thing of the past. I got asked the other day what the red ribbon I was wearing was. I was shocked. I mean, the thing is that's one of the messages of the film, is to bring it back to the young generations. Jean-Claude's always said, the director has always said that this is his small contribution to something that hasn't gone away.
Well, it's the illusion that it's a manageable disease. AIDS is still incurable.
Yeah,
AIDS
and it's still rising.
Through pharmaceuticals and science, people's lives have been extended, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is a good thing.
But it doesn't. It's much better to not get HIV positive or to get sick.
I prefer to not get AIDS than to have a great wild bareback night. You know what I mean?
But it's good to also endorse sexuality, though.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I want to talk about something you may not want to talk about, and that's okay too. But in the world outside, a lot of the way people see homosexuality is that, well, it's the person who gets. If I'm the inserter, I'm not gay. But or that sort of masculine, heroic kind of role, and the person who is the bottom, who is anally penetrated, is like a secondary woman. And
you really think so?
Do I really think so?
Yeah.
I'm talking about the world outside.
Yeah.
No. So the question is, I thought it was pretty brave of any actor to play someone who was clearly stated he's the bottom. Yeah. That's what he is in this thing.
Well, that's how he survived. I mean, it's how Jake's made his living. He left. I always thought he had left America probably with some kind of sugar daddy. It's the way he's got by. He's got used to, as you cited earlier on, about a lot of kids who suffer abuse or sexual workers and such. He's learned, as he says in the film, to turn off. Just to give them his ass, just to give him. He makes money, he has a place to live, he gets by. He has his own little private world, but he just switches off and gives them that side of himself, which that line itself came out of a lot of research. I mean, remember, was it Mary Ellen Mark made that, was Streetwise, you remember? And there was a character in that was talking about just switching off and giving himself over to the client. And that's where Jake's at. He's not so much about, he's just providing what the customer wants. And it's very tragic, but it's true. A lot of people talk like that.
You know, in this sort of postmodern world, in the gender studies, academia world, the celebration of the sex worker, the romantic notion.
It's dangerously romanticized at times.
And so you have a film here which sort of peels away.
But also keeps the kind of fairy tale attitude while talking about something quite serious.
Well, it keeps a fairy tale attitude because I think it's 1982, and you know, people really didn't know what was going on, and it was still a party. And what happens is that each of the main characters in this film are confronted with something has happened, something has changed, someone that they all know has gotten sick. It's not something outside.
Absolutely, and for me, that's when I first read the script, that was one of the powerful things about the film. I feel like it looks, I don't feel like it, I know it, and it looks at the disease, the topic, from the personal. It looks at it from how it affects a small group of people in the community. Of course, it looks at the widespread, which became not just an epidemic, but a pandemic, which is the scariest word in the world. It looks at it from the personal, how it affects a community, how it affects an individual. For me, that's the power of the film, the way it addresses the subject from that angle. You know.
Let's leave House of Boys. Okay. Tell me what you think of Montgomery Cliff.
Montgomery Cliff. Wow, I love Montgomery Cliff. I always love that REM song where the chorus goes, "Monty got a raw deal." It's tragic that the prejudice is still alive in the workplace, in many occasions, within the communities, within the schools. I remember growing up at school, you didn't come as a lot of people when they were shouting abuse at someone, they didn't come someone an arsehole or a bastard. They called them a gaylord. I mean, it's horrible how society still has all this kind of homophobia ingrained, but Montgomery Cliff was one of the most gifted actors. And I think when Michael Stipe wrote that lyric, "Monty got a raw deal," it was more than right.
You ever met Michael?
Yeah, he's a good friend. He's cool.
He is a friend.
He's a lovely guy.
He's a friend too.
Oh, really? I saw him in Paris recently. He's an amazing human being.
All right, so what happens to Ben now? You know,
Ben now?
Ben now.
Well, I mean, it's a wonderful period of time. I mean, it's just what I mean by that is I'm very grateful for the fact that I've worked with some filmmakers I've always admired. I've worked on some productions and some characters that are very passionate for me in terms of projects, and it's an exciting position to be in. Now I feel like I have something to go with, something to
Other than Gus.
Other than Gus.
Who are the other directors?
Well, Gus is like right up there.
Yeah, but who are the other directors you want to work with?
Jarmusch has always been somebody. Walter Salles, somebody I'd love to work with. Scorsese has always been on my list. Bellatar is somebody I'd love to work with.
Bellatar.
Yeah, I really love Satan Tango. I don't know where I'd fit into his resume, but one of the wonderful things I've experienced about acting is working with the different directors, working with different ways they work, giving yourself over to a project. How can you facilitate making that vision happen? I mean, working with Mike Figgis for me was a really fulfilling experience. Leaving Las Vegas, I remember when I first saw that, listening to Nick Cage's like Kerouac-esque kind of mumbles, thinking something's happening in there. I mean, that's one of the things I really find very rewarding about acting is this difference of ways of working and experiencing that, giving yourself over to that.
All right, Ben, we're finishing up here now.
Oh shit, I was enjoying this.
And is there anything that you want to say in context of House of Boys as an actor and as a person who's alive in the world today? To anyone who's listening to this, watching this.
I mean, as an actor, I'd say that House of Boys was just one of the most wonderfully rewarding experiences, being a part of a project that was so passionate for the people that were making it, so important for the people that were making it. And also just leaving your ego at the door, just throwing yourself really into it. I've said to many people that I still can feel the character of Jake inside. And I think for House of Boys, I really hope that people can see past the kind of, I mean, the glitz and the music is all very important, but just to understand the theme and actually take on board. The real message in House of Boys ends when the end credits roll. You know, I hope that the individuals start to think about their lives, think about how they conduct themselves sexually. You know, AIDS is a human disease and it's still alive, and it needs people to react to it.